In this lesson, we're going to do an introduction to reproduction. Now, in past lessons, we've learned that all living things possess these characteristics. You must have all of these characteristics to be considered alive. We've certainly seen that life on Earth is cellular. We've also learned that living things use energy and perform complex chemical reactions called metabolism. So in this lesson, we're going to introduce this next characteristic on the list. Living things reproduce and show heredity. Now, by heredity, we mean that parents can pass on traits to their offspring. Surprisingly, the concept of reproduction only entered the scientific vocabulary in the 1800s. Earlier naturalists used the term generation to refer to the production of new life forms. And likewise, the concept of heredity is a modern understanding. Well, what were the ancients thinking? Well, we could revise this item here in the following way as far as ancients were concerned, that some living things appeared to reproduce, dogs and cats and people, but lots of other living things did not reproduce in that way. They generated. Well, what did they generate from? A lot of people believed living things could generate from non-living material, and this was called spontaneous generation. This was the emergence of a living thing from non-living material. For example, the Roman poet Virgil recorded a recipe for making bees. If you want to make some bees, well, you get a bull and you kill the bull in the springtime, put it on some branches and herbs, and then come back in the summertime and you'll have bees. Apparently, a lot of people believed that the dead flesh could spontaneously generate into a living organism, in this case, bees. There were many other such beliefs in ancient times, that soil could spontaneously generate into various kinds of bugs out there in the nature. How could this happen? Well, perhaps nature had some kind of vital force that had the power to whip up non-living stuff and turn it into life. So notice then, if we replace this with the modern understanding, in ancient times they did not think that all living things showed heredity. After all, in the case of spontaneous generation, if dirt can turn into a bug, then there's no passing on of traits in this example. And furthermore, reproduction then was not universal because lots of things they thought could spontaneously generate. So that's a little bit of the history of the concept of reproduction and heredity, but for the rest of the lesson I want to introduce how important reproduction was for the success of life on planet Earth. And to understand why, we need to notice another characteristic of living things. Living things are highly organized. Now, this concept of organization is important in the world of physics as well. Everything, say physicists, is subject to the laws of nature. Now, we've all experienced how our living space becomes more disordered over time, and we must expend energy to do work to maintain the order of our homes. This is, what our bedrooms can turn into sometimes. And we've all seen around the places, around our streets, we've seen how vehicles can fall apart without upkeep. Now, physicists have a way of capturing this process that we see all around us every day, and it's called entropy. Entropy is a term used in physics to describe the disorder of any system of objects or processes. The second law of thermodynamics states that over time, the entropy of a system will increase. It will become more and more disordered. The laws of thermodynamics are another example of patterns that scientists have discovered in our universe. Now, life is also subject to the laws of nature. So living things are complex, highly organized objects that must get energy and other resources from their environment to maintain their orderly structure. This is true of a single-celled organism or an animal like ourselves. The tendency for ordered things to become disordered in the universe makes living things vulnerable to damage, dysfunction, and death. But life persists because of reproduction. When chemical reactions produced the first cells on Earth some 4 billion years ago, the experiment that is life might have quickly ended were it not for one clever trick. What allowed life to persist for so long was reproduction. Imagine the first living cell was the only cell, and it could not reproduce. In time, in obeyance of the laws of thermodynamics, this little organized cell would encounter hostile conditions or accumulate damage and become disordered. It would die with nothing to replace it. Even if the cell had great resilience in the face of hostile factors in the environment and could repair itself quickly and effectively, there would be catastrophic events that no single cell could survive. So our little cell might have been the first cell, but it would be the last as it encountered some unfortunate event. But because of reproduction, with more individuals in the population, there were always some individuals that avoided danger and/or maintained their organization. By reproducing, living things battled against the relentless march of increasing entropy in our universe. So reproduction increased the odds of some individuals surviving over time. In addition, we will learn that living things have a way of fixing the recipes for their own construction, and the evolutionary process itself tends to preserve the best functioning individuals in the population. In the 1900s, there were many religious thinkers who believed that life violated the laws of thermodynamics. After all, how can a cell be self-sustaining if entropy constantly increases? So these religious thinkers believed that only God could explain how life was sustained. God was responsible for creating and sustaining life, because otherwise life appeared to violate the laws of thermodynamics. Well, entropy does indeed increase for a closed system where no energy enters or leaves the system. The question was, are cells closed systems? And the answer for the biologist and the physicist is no, they are not. Cells are open systems where energy flows into and out of the cell. This means that cells can create local order even though they are in an environment where disorder is increasing. So if we just look at the cell, it appears like it's violating the laws of thermodynamics, but we have to take a wider gaze. We have to look at the larger environment. So let's take a look at this picture here. We have living things emerging early in the history of life, and they're going to be eating some molecules and importing this energy. Now, the way the biologists and physicists view this is that the cells are decreasing the entropy, in other words, increasing order, and they're maintaining this order, but it's at the expense of entropy increasing in the environment. So the amount of entropy decreasing here is offset by a greater amount of disorder in the environment, and this satisfies the laws of thermodynamics. So for the religious thinkers, they thought they found another reason to believe in God, that cells appeared to violate the laws of thermodynamics, but a proper understanding of thermodynamics suggests otherwise. So for all species alive today, reproduction made our existence possible. And it's just incredible to think about how clever living things are. They convert their environment into similar copies of themselves. But how exactly do they do that? And that'll take us to the next part of our lesson series, DNA.